Thanks everyone for coming. We should probably make a start, and maybe some more people will join when they can't get a seat in the other rooms, and we'll fill up. We're not daft. Anyway, thank you for coming and for joining us with our symposium today, which is called Understanding and Addressing Intimate Partner Violence Perpetration in the Context of Substance Use. I'm Gail Gilchrist. I'm a Professor in Addictions Healthcare Research at King's College London, and this is my colleague, not my sister, not my partner, just very random. It's a very uncommon surname and we both seem to have it, and we're both from Scotland. So Liz Gilchrist, who's a Professor in Psychological Therapies at the University of Edinburgh. So there's four different talks that are all about the same topic or from the same study in this symposium. So first of all, we're going to talk about the role of substance use in intimate partner violence perpetration. And then we're going to talk about or provide a descriptive model of the pathways between substance use and intimate partner violence perpetration for men. We're then going to share with you the development and our actual intervention, the Advanced D programme to reduce partner violence by men in substance use treatment or in the context of substance use, and then the evaluation of that project. And then we'll hopefully leave some time for question and answers. And we've left some resources there for people, and I'll give you our website details as well. So before we started, I did want to give people the warning or the heads up that this presentation does contain direct quotes and scenes of domestic abuse, which some people might find upsetting or distressing. So please look after yourself. If you need to leave the room or if you want to speak to Liz or I after the session, please do so, because looking after yourself is the most important thing you can do. As we've heard in all the talks in the last couple of days, it's not just myself and Liz, there's a whole team behind us with the research, and I want to acknowledge them and all their institutions. We have no disclosures and no conflicts of interest. The research was funded by the National Institute for Health and Social Care Research in the UK, and the views presented today are ours and not theirs. So I'll start off with the first presentation, which is the role of substance use in intimate partner violence perpetration. So I've started off with a slide about Canada. 6 in 10 Indigenous and 4 in 10 non-Indigenous women have ever experienced intimate partner violence. And if we look at the past year, it's 1 in 6 Indigenous women and 1 in 8 non-Indigenous women. And by intimate partner violence, we mean psychological, physical or sexual is how it's been measured in the Canadian studies. But we're also looking at things like financial abuse, emotional abuse, stalking, digital technology abuse. So these are some basic statistics from Canada. And I wanted to then move on to our research in the UK. So in the UK, we know that 8% of women have experienced intimate partner violence in the last year. And this is not to say that men don't experience domestic abuse and that people of other genders or sexualities don't experience or perpetrate intimate partner violence. But what we do know is women are more likely to experience severe violence and more likely to, or severe injury, and more likely to be murdered by a male partner than men are. So our project focuses on violence perpetrated by men towards women. So in our general population in the UK, it's 8% of women who've ever experienced or who've experienced violence from a partner in the past year. Then when we look on to studies that I've conducted looking at women in substance use treatment, we've got 57% of women in substance use treatment have experienced domestic abuse in the past year. And then when we looked at women who were injecting drugs, that figure increases up to 70%. So there's definitely something going on there. So I then got money from the American Foundation for AIDS Research to look at risk factors for experiencing domestic violence among women in substance use treatment. And the sort of jumping out figure here is that, women who lived with a male substance user were 4 times more likely to have experienced domestic abuse. And so the shift is, not why doesn't she leave him, but why does he behave that way? So that shifted our focus of our research to try and think about what is it about this group of men and what could possibly be done to intervene. So there's no single risk factor explaining why some men are violent towards women and some are not. But we know that substance use, especially abuse and dependence, is a risk factor. And that's in many studies, whether it's population studies or clinical samples. And in our research, we found 4 in 10 men in substance use treatment had perpetrated violence towards their partner in the past year, and that's about 4 times higher than men in the general population. So we know that men with substance use disorders are about 7 or 8 times more likely to be arrested for intimate partner violence, and they're also more likely to reoffend. So we need to think about that when we think about intervention and what we can do to try and address this. And in the UK, substance use features in about half of all domestic homicide reviews. So why might that be? Well, we know what the risk factors are for intimate partner violence perpetration, and among men in substance use treatment, they have elevated prevalence of these existing known risk factors. So, 7 in 10 had experienced childhood abuse, 8 in 10 had witnessed abuse growing up, 9 out of 10 were generally violent, we've got hazardous drinking, and we've got probable depression. And when we also did a study in men in substance use treatment in England, we found that about 2/3 of them had perpetrated intimate partner violence ever towards a partner. And it wasn't just, physical violence. I think that's the thing. Sometimes when people talk about intimate partner violence, they think about physical violence or beatings, and it's much more than that, as you can see. So controlling coercive behaviours, technology-facilitated abuse, as well as emotional and sexual violence. And we also see, again, jumping out, that having a partner who used substances for men, so if men had a female partner that used substances, that was also predictive of more severe intimate partner violence perpetration. And by more severe, I mean things like burning, choking, sexual violence, etc. So we then started a sort of 6-year project called Advance, which we started off by doing reviews of qualitative studies to look at, and we also conducted our own interviews with men and then separately their female partners, to look at the role that substance use played in the perpetration of intimate partner violence. So we did a meta-ethnography. We had 26 qualitative studies in our review, and we wanted to look at mentions of or how men and women explained or talked about the domestic abuse and the relationship that substance use had in the violence. And we found sort of 5 key themes there. So intoxication, and again, when people think about substance use and how it might have a role to play in intimate partner violence, they think of, oh, he was drunk, it's not him, it was the drink. But it's much wider than that, and I'll talk about that this morning. But we also found men were more likely to be abusive when they were in withdrawal or craving. It had an impact on the relationship, the substance use. But there was also the wider dynamics of power and control going on. And both men and women brought histories of psychological vulnerabilities with them to the relationship. We then interviewed 37 men in substance use treatment that had a history of perpetrating intimate partner violence, and we then separately interviewed as many of their female partners as agreed, which was 14. And we used the free association narrative method to tell their stories. And we did case studies, pen portraits, building up the story from both sides to really understand what was going on in that relationship. And our research, as I said, found that men's substance use was linked with their use of abusive behaviours when intoxicated, but also when craving and in withdrawal and when acquiring substances. So you can see alcohol, it brings out the worst in me, or my son's father used to beat me when he didn't have enough money to get straight. Or one man explains or justifies his behaviour, well, I was agitated, I was coming down, I needed something, so I just lashed out. But substance use was rarely the only explanation for intimate partner violence perpetration. And IPV was linked with men's sexual jealousy and with their perceptions of women behaving improperly and opposing their male authority. So you can see in these slides, in purple is the women and green's the men. So I think he'd been drinking the night before because he'd been on cocaine and he was paranoid, saying that I'd been seeing other people, and he just started hitting me. And in green, one guy says, I just fly off the handle if her ex-partner texts her and I've been drinking. And then in the last quote, you don't know if alcohol is involved or not. This guy says his wife's gone to the pub and said she was going to meet family. He goes to check up that that's who she's actually with, and if he sees that she's talking to someone else, so behaving improperly, he pulls her out the pub, smacks her, and takes her home. But it was very difficult to separate the effects of intoxication from controlling behaviour, where the perceived improprieties of the part of the woman was justified by the man for his physical violence towards her. So in this couple, which you can see, she says, I've been to the pub, I'd come back, and I could tell he was intoxicated. He just started shouting. I told him to go to his bed. He came back down. He headbutted me and he slapped me across the face. And she tried to, de-escalate that. But he says, I'd had a drink, but not that much. And she'd been to the pub, and basically the children come back with him and with her, and he sort of flips that he thinks it's improper that she's had the children in the pub. We had an argument. I didn't slap her. I pushed her away, and then I went back to get my tobacco. The rug was there. I tripped over the rug and I fell on her, and I headbutted her. So you can see two very different stories of the same episode. And men and women explained the role of alcohol very differently. They both talked about intoxication and loss of control and craving and withdrawal, but women experienced economic abuse from the man's drinking around, maybe misspending family resources or withholding money. Men talked about sexual betrayal, whereas women talked about men's sexual jealousy and controlling behaviour, rather than men talking about that as a desire to protect their partner. And men always talk about abuse as a one-off incident arising from an argument, whereas women described a pattern of domestic abuse and controlling behaviours, and definitely not a one-off. And so here you can see a quote about, protective behaviours from the man's standpoint, so very contrasting descriptions. He says, I'm just trying to look out for her, I don't like her, I'm nervous of her going out and someone taking her away from me. She's nice, she's pretty, I just didn't like it and I felt vulnerable in myself. I thought, and I'm always protective over her. And that was Mike, but his partner Jenny says he just started to get it really controlling where I went, who I saw. And if he didn't like what I did, he'd hit me. So you can see very contrasting explanations, protective versus controlling behaviours. And we've used all of these narratives to develop our intervention, the exercises and the films. We're going to show you some of the films, which are quite harrowing, so please do look after yourselves. And in this first one, Jim and Marie, Jim has been to the pub, his partner Marie has been out. Hopefully that'll work. His partner Marie's been out with her friend for lunch and he's been trying to contact her. So you can see he may be intoxicated, but he's also sending her countless messages, where are you, where are you, where are you? And his friend is saying, oh, she's in bed next to me, she's having sex with me. All these things are sort of fueling his behaviour, and then you'll see how the violence or how the argument escalates into physical violence. I'm not sure if we can hear this one or not. Yeah, we can.
She's right here in bed next to me.
No, seriously.
Closer I am. Don't want to think else.
Thanks for the advice, mate.
Hey Jim. Sorry I'm late, mate. Totally lost track of time. Remind me to never go shopping with Maxine again. You should have seen her on this waitress at lunch. She's hilarious. Oh, poor guy didn't know what to hear him. A man that was getting paid to be there. We went for pizza, that's all.
So you've been shopping?
Yeah, we did, and then we went for something to eat.
You and Maxine?
Yeah, me and Max. What's all this about?
I've been trying to call you for a couple of hours now.
Yeah, my phone died.
Don't lie to me.
I'm not lying. Jim!
Will you tell me who you were with?
I told you!
I told you I don't believe you.
I don't want to argue with you, Jim.
Well then tell the truth!
You're drunk. You know what you're talking about. Go to bed.
Do not tell me to go to bed, alright? I'm not a fucking child! But tell me who you're with! You're in bed! I hope it was worth it.
So as you can see, they're unfortunately very realistic, so I hope everyone is okay. And Liz will talk later about how we've used these stories to develop and integrate those into the intervention. So we also looked at the relationship dynamics in these 14 couples, these 14 dyads, and we had sort of 3 distinct groups. So one where the woman had never been substance dependent, and the narrative around that was, she didn't understand what was happening, why he was disappearing, why money was going, was he seeing someone else? So that insecurity and irrational, inexplicable behaviour from her partner. And then there was 2 groups. One where the woman was desisting from substance use, so she had been a substance user and they'd had that in common. They'd had that mutual struggle against drug dependency and the intimacy that had created, but that was now gone because she was no longer using. And sometimes men tried to force women back into substance use. And we had others where the victim was also substance dependent, and that was a narrative of sort of a struggle against destitution. So they had sort of things in shared, the shared need for transactional relationships around drugs or around somewhere to stay. So we've tried to incorporate all of these different dynamics into the intervention. And in this particular scene, if it works. Yes, it does. This is an example of one of those relationship dynamics. So in this particular story, she's not aware that he's started using heroin, and he's obviously hiding that from her. She's given him money to get resources from the family, but he's spent it on something else. And it's about how that plays out. And in the intervention, we work on how things could be done differently. So we've got videos where, he's still rattling and he still needs to go out and get sorted, but how he could have done that differently and more respectfully without it erupting into violence. Just noticed the walls match the colour of our... That wasn't intentional.
No, I'm good, thanks. I've got a drink. I know.
We don't go out as a family anymore.
Well, I'll be back in a bit and we can go out as a family then.
James, where's the shopping? Where is he? And the money I gave you?
I don't know.
What? You can't afford to throw 20 quid away.
Yeah. Right, will you give it a rest, please, Donna?
Answer me. Is there somebody else?
I can't do this right now. Okay, will you move?
No!
I need to go.
Go where?
I swear to God, if you don't
What
move...
are you gonna do?
Couldn't just let it go, couldn't you?
So another, unfortunately, harrowing situation. So they had planned a day out with the daughter. He'd obviously messed that up by going out. And at the end, unfortunately, you hear the child crying as well. So I just wanted to check in if everyone's okay after the videos. Yeah, excellent. And I think the last slide on this one is around sort of economic abuse, but we've probably covered that already. So I'll stop there and I'll hand you over to Liz. I don't know, should we do all the questions at the end? We'll try and leave sort of 20 minutes at the end for questions. Does that sound okay? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I'll be relatively brief in this, but as a forensic psychologist and in the interest of trying to develop an intervention that was effective, we were looking to establish the criminogenic need in this population. And we recognised a huge amount of diversity. So what we wanted to do was use this qualitative information to identify whether or not there were different backgrounds, different ACEs in the background, different pathways into the substance use and intimate partner abuse that might have implications for interventions. So using the same 37 men and based on that narrative interview, so this is a fairly free-flowing account of their pathways from childhood through intimate relationships, all the intimate relationships they've had, and also their stories and their accounts of how they became involved in substances, when they've moved in and out, and that kind of the moving, the history, the dynamic pathway that they've had through to where they are now. We used inductive thematic analysis. So what we did was we took half of that sample and looked to try and see if there were clusters of different people with different accounts and different backgrounds and different presentations sort of in the here and now that were useful and helpful in terms of focusing treatment. And then we used the other half to kind of go through and say, well, okay, the initial models that we've identified, do they account for these men as well? So there was both a building and then a testing of the model when we did it. And in a helpful way, it's worked out quite well. This took years of analysis, though it took a very, very long time to try and understand what the pathways were and to sort of theme and cluster people together. So we identified 3 different pathways from this group, where we had one group where it looked as if they had had early childhood abusive experiences. So they'd had physical, sexual abuse in their family of origin and childhood abuse as well. And because of that, they'd ended up with a kind of really insecure sense of self. They'd started coping through substance use. Substance use was their pathway. So they were entrenched substance users. It was linked into that really early adversity, really poor coping, very avoidant coping, and really high instability in terms of that sense of self. So one of their, obviously, to focus on that, we were going to have to focus on the trauma. We were going to have to focus on, or at least acknowledge and be informed by that trauma background, and then help people to move into more positive self-regulation in terms of emotional regulation and better coping styles. We had a group, though, that didn't have like early childhood experiences of abuse. And we're like, excellent, they've got positive family, you know, low adversity in the family, parents present, good parenting experiences, no particular adversity, and then you end up with a high trauma challenge sometime in that journey between sort of childhood into early adulthood. At that point, those protective mechanisms that had helped them manage their own relationships and manage their substance use, so that their substance use was actually initially more just recreational and quite easy, tipped into then dependency and problem relationships. And that at all points there seemed to be a drawback when the protective factors were in place. So when they were in custody and not drinking, not taking drugs, things were better. When they came out, things were difficult. With stable income, with stable housing, it was better. But they really ended up with this quite high dependency in their relationships. And they ended up being the ones that we talked about relationship insecurity. They were the ones where there was the highest amount of sexual jealousy, checking and controlling. So for them, it wasn't so much the substance use, although that made things worse, and much more around relationships, narratives, and that dependency. So there were focuses there around lifestyle, protective factors, actually planning how to live a pro-social life rather than an anti-social life. And then the third pathway we had was there was a different type of early negative childhood experience, which was more around parents having substance use issues, parental criminality, parental imprisonment, so parents not present. But rule breaking and antisocial lifestyles being part and parcel of what they were growing up with. They were the ones where there was involvement both in drug dealing as well as substance use themselves. And, you know, substance use seemed to be just another way of expressing rule breaking. So they were there and using drugs sometimes, dealing drugs sometimes, with adversity in the background and quite resistant and low motivation to engage. And those were the ones that we called the rule-breaking pathway. And you could imagine that you would be dealing and incentivizing this group differently in terms of changing the cost benefits of their behaviours and looking at using enlightened self-interest to kind of nudge them out of that behaviours. So what we basically identified was that it was quite a complex group. That actually there was trauma in everybody's background. So in line with what we're doing in the UK, which is recognising that trauma and being trauma-informed across services, we were very keen to have a trauma-informed intervention that was going to say, okay, we need to recognise where you come from, understand the pathway you've taken into this, what you're doing now, and then seek to address across these various different targets. So emotional regulation, coping styles, stability, sense of self, the cost benefits of continuing with the behaviours. So we were giving people skills, we were enhancing their ability to recognise the abuse. So it wasn't just about physical violence, it was about controlling behaviours. Getting them to recognise that that dysphoric emotion that they were feeling wasn't necessarily out there. You couldn't sort of swivel and blame the partner or blame somebody else or cope avoidantly. So that sense of being emotionally literate, recognising that and addressing it in a way that wasn't avoidant coping and more pro-social, solution-focused. We were trying to be strengths-based to actually say, what can you do? So I think somebody earlier was talking about the many hours that you don't spend in a psychologist's office or an intervention, some of which is pro-social, not all of it is antisocial. So really trying to hone in on what would actually drive people forward. So we tried to create an intervention that addressed all of the various different needs of the population, because we don't know enough to actually separate people out into types. We will test it in the next intervention, but at the moment, all people, all the men coming through our intervention are exposed to all the elements, and we're really clear that some things will work more for others. You know, some things will resonate with you. My goal and our goal was really just to have something, one thing. If it was a small interrupt and if it was harm reduction, that would be enough. What we didn't want to do was displace from physical violence, though, into controlling behaviours, so we were addressing all of that. We didn't want to ignore the gender issue, so we have focused on masculinities, some of the entitlement, some of the patriarchal thinking that's there. We've highlighted sexual jealousy and tried to provide information around how to manage sexual insecurity, etc., and ending of relationships in a different way. And we've highlighted motivation and engagement.
So before we talk about our actual intervention, we did a lot of work around what works or what might work or what looks like it's working. And I guess the current issue, or if there's only one take-home message, it is that there is a need for a targeted perpetrator programme for this population. And the reason for that is substance use treatment on its own doesn't stop intimate partner violence. Some studies out there will show an improvement in relationships and a reduction in intimate partner violence, but it doesn't stop. It's still at a level that's relatively high. So we need to really think about what is it for this population, what's specific about them, and what would, as Liz has been outlining, what would be the most effective approach for them. So we know that certainly in the UK, and I'm not sure, it'd be interesting at the end to hear what's happening in Canada, there's a lack of referral pathways. I think only 1% of people who require specialist perpetrator interventions actually get them. So, you know, there's not an abundance of services out there anyway. And men with substance use problems are very rarely referred to perpetrator programs, not talking about court mandated at the moment, talking about in general community programs. And when they are, they're usually the ones that are most likely to drop out or to not engage. And I guess that's the same from some of the studies in criminal justice as well. So there's a lack of referral pathways is the issue. Oh, it should go slide to slide. I'm not sure what's happening. Anyway, there should be a whole, oh no, sorry. So we developed, and there's some people have been taking them from the table, we developed a framework for addressing intimate partner violence perpetration in substance use treatment settings. And we worked with policymakers, providers, people with lived experience, people with living experience, and service users, as well as academics, to look at, you know, how could substance use treatment services respond better. And we interviewed staff from both sectors, and staff who work in drug and alcohol sectors at that time, so we're talking, that was 2015 that was published, 2016, said they lacked the sufficient knowledge and confidence to ask about IPV, and then they didn't know how to deal with that in the routine work. And then also it was similar from the domestic abuse sector. We don't know what to do if we uncover men with substance use problems. So there was, at that time, there's a lack of clear protocols, pathways, guidance and supervision for this client group and for undertaking this work with this client group. So in our framework document, it looks at knowledge. So what do you need to know? What skills do you need to have? Role legitimacy. Yes, it is your role to ask about this and to know what services are available. And so how do you identify that? What do you do with disclosure? How do you facilitate disclosure? And then you know, what do you do? How do you keep working with someone once they have they've explained that there's domestic abuse in their relationship? Remember, this is about the men that are perpetrating violence, not the women who are experiencing it. There's very clear guidance for victims of domestic abuse and safeguarding around that, but less so when we look at men. And that document's cited in the UK drug misuse treatment guidance. So I won't go through this because I've sat here for a day and I can't read those slides, so if anyone else can, that's great. But you can pick it up or you can download it at the end. Basically, you can read the bit at the top that's about facilitating disclosure. So we've got a description, so what is it? And then we've used quotes from service providers and quotes from men themselves to structure this framework. So we've got facilitating disclosure, we've got gathering information about risk, we've got knowing what to do with disclosure, continuing to work with someone after disclosure. So I'll leave you to look at those yourself. So for us, the solution might be training and delivery of perpetrator programs in substance use treatment settings. So that might address that lack of referral pathways and lack of confidence and knowledge. And as I said, we know that men are rarely referred, and when they are, they're the ones who are most likely to not engage or to drop out or to have high recidivism to violence. So looking at the literature that is out there, we know that integrated interventions, so bringing together the drug and alcohol with the domestic abuse, are the ones that show the most promise. And we also know that incorporating substance abuse or trauma components to perpetrator programs have also shown better results. So goal setting, motivational interviewing, alongside what's already going on with the content about integrating substance use to the perpetrator programs. So all of these references you can download. So when we do the evidence suggests when you do include motivational or goal-setting strategies, attendance rates, treatment adherence, motivation for change, and behavioural and attitudinal changes have all taken place. So we need to incorporate motivational, substance abuse and trauma components to our interventions. And again, it may be different in Canada, so I'd be really keen to hear what's going on here. But there's this one-size-fits-all approach, and it doesn't recognise or it ignores the individual differences that have been strongly linked with intimate partner violence perpetration, such as substance use, such as mental health. So, you know, as I say, we do need a tailored approach or tailored programs to target the risk factors for intimate partner violence and recidivism by men who use substances. So I'll pass you on to Liz, who'll talk firstly about our advanced program and how it was developed into digital delivery.
Brilliant. We're just doing this like little, you know, back and forward. We were offered 2 mics and I said, no, it'll look like we're singing a duet and you do not want to hear me sing. Anyhow. In terms of the advanced intervention, what we wanted to do was take all the knowledge that we had, all the knowledge we'd gleaned, and all the what works information. You know, we're looking back to CBT being more effective, motivational interviewing, etc., and pull it together. So as a forensic psychologist, I was looking at the what works literature that came out of North America, you know, in response to Mattinson's Nothing Works. And actually taking that actually interventions focused on criminogenic need rather than human need, but taking into account risk and responsivity issues are more effective. So not just doing a load of things to make people feel better, but targeting the things that lead to their perpetration of the behaviour and helping them think themselves how they're going to prevent relapse. We took all the existing approaches, the substance use perpetration review and the interviews with men, pulled it all together, along with that pathways analysis of it. So what are the targets that we need to think about? What are the responsivity issues? Responsivity, that's sort of getting in the way of attending, getting in the way of engaging, the barriers to turning up. You know, what is it that we need to be doing? We talked a lot to people with lived experience and living experience, and we had a learning alliance of people like yourselves who were working in the area, so people who were working in policy, people who were working in substance use, people who were working in domestic abuse shelters with victims, with perpetrators, and pulled it all together and used the COM-B model. So that's the looking at capacity, opportunity and motivation to change behaviour, to then pull that together and specify, okay, based on all our theoretical work, our empirical work, what is it we need to change in terms of capacity and how would we do it? Where do we focus? What do we need to do in terms of opportunity for people to see the pro-social behaviours they might use, the pro-social and non-abusive solutions to problems? And how do we encourage the motivation to engage? Because most men who attend intimate partner abuse programmes are doing so not because they are motivated to change themselves. They're doing it because their partner is either going to leave if they don't, the courts are going to take their kids, or they've been convicted and they've been told that, you know, they're going to jail otherwise. So it's extrinsic motivation at a highest level. And we need to take the extrinsic motivation and translate that into intrinsic motivation within an intervention. We can get people to turn up, and then the skill is to try and get the people in the room to want to change as well. So what we did was we made explicit the targets that we had. We looked at including personal goal planning. So actually one of the very first things, so there's a risk assessment, and then one of the very, very first sessions in any of the advanced interventions is to have a goal setting. What do you want in 4 months? If this has worked, what would you like to have changed? It has to be pro-social. It cannot be about controlling their partner. It has to be about their own behaviours. But it might be, I want to get to the end of a conversation with my ex-partner without arguing. I would like to facilitate child contact without us falling out about it. I might want to get healthier myself. I might want to be using drugs less and not use it with the kids. There's a range of things, but they have to be smart, realistic goals, small steps. And actually, that's the thing that we use to then get people to motivate to come back to. We use the self-regulation, so not just emotional regulation, but that sense of having learned how to fail a lot in substance use and broken relationships. How do I learn to do it well, do it better, on the basis that self-regulation says you succeed in one domain, it will translate over to other domains. So those small positive steps about coping, about making different choices and doing it differently, with the world still being as difficult as it is, with your partner not being an angel, with things being challenging and difficult, and still in the context of substance use, we look at that. There's a CBT element, looking at thinking, behaviours, feelings, and always we've woven through the acquiring substances, the substance using lifestyles, that patriarchal entitlement, and as well as intoxication, craving and withdrawal, is fed through. So it's like we understand your life to an extent. We recognise the difficulties, but here's how you could make choices, small changes, to put that interrupt so that you don't end up being abusive. We use the nested ecological framework so that we're not just saying it's at an individual level things need to change, we're recognising the family, we're recognising the family dynamics in family of origin, subcultural issues, the culture around about them, and the overall structure. So we use that and we acknowledge that. I've talked about goal theory, self-regulation. We're trauma-informed, so we're not addressing the trauma, but we do have some elements where we go back to saying, you know, this is maybe how it was for you as a child, and how is it for your children? So we incorporate that parenting and being parented as well, and kind of problematise and then address that too. We look at social information processing, so linking back to CBT with the negative automatic thoughts, that kind of, you know, is it that you attend to things differently? When you get your beer goggles on, are you getting that anchoring effect? Is it that you can't take on more information because you've got limited cognitive processing? What's happening there? And we draw people's attention to that and get them to think, you know, are they jumping to conclusions basically? Are there other ways of doing it? Can they stop, pause, step back and respond, not react? And we'd talk about intersectionality and feminist theories. So there are various different core identities that are of import. And we acknowledge that because this intervention at the moment is for male perpetrators in heterosexual relationships. We've created a range of different theory books, manuals, handouts, websites. In the beginning, we had 12 group sessions and your standard handout with, you know, homework to do, you know, in between sessions. So we'd go through a session, people would leave, they would go and do their homework tasks, come back in and do the group work session. And that went really well. And Gail will tell you how we tested that out. We had a feasibility evaluation done. But then we had COVID and lots of people stopped working they stopped delivering groups. They just stopped entirely. So we then got permission to pivot. Instead of going to an RCT of the group that we developed, We then were given permission to change it and change it into a digital intervention. So I don't know who was in the room previously, but we were using that kind of technology, but not just the website technology where the self-directed learning. We had an adjunct of that, of going back and delivering teams, so groups on teams, you know, sort of like digitally delivered groups, and then coaching phone calls. A lot of it was to do with managing risk, managing monitoring of people's drinking and relationships and risk during COVID kind of considerations. And actually it's created a really integrated model where there is contact with the man in a group. So we do a group video online, and then they decide to do some website sessions. They say when they're going to do it, and then somebody will phone them up, check how they understood it, check their relationship, check their substance use status, and think about risk, reinforce the messages. Alongside that, there's a website for women, so women can see, so partners and ex-partners can see all of the information that the men would see, and they get safety messages as well. Key one being, this isn't magic, keep looking after yourself, and it's not on you to change. But he can't then use this material against you, you can see it as well, and there's a lot of support there for you. They get weekly calls if they want. There are partner support workers funded for the project. We also have case management meetings. We also have risk meetings if they have to have, and referral on as needed. And we have integrity support, which is like a treatment management fortnightly meeting, so that people delivering the intervention stick the sort of fidelity, assuring fidelity of the delivery of the intervention. We had used an iterative model to develop this, so we used a lot of experience of those who had experienced intimate partner abuse, had been involved in interventions, to draw forward what we could do, whether it was acceptable, what were the best things, the best method of delivery, the acceptability even of the coaches, the digital coaches we had, the kind of accent we wanted them to have, all of that, and really used that knowledge to iteratively develop the intervention. And that's basically the intervention. Individual goal sessions, then 7 online groups. A lot of this was actually because we'd initially gone entirely to website sessions, but then for safety and risk, we wanted to have our person kind of look at some of the emotive materials and check people's responses to it. Remember, this was in COVID, so we didn't want to have people who were distressed somewhere else that we didn't know about and we couldn't monitor. So we brought that back in. And actually, when Gail talks about the evaluations of this, you'll see that the group was actually well received, and all of it together, that multimodal, fits really well with what we know as best evidence for various different, for effective practice, because we all learn in different ways. The website practice sessions and then the coaching calls. And this is what a typical fortnight would look like. So week 1, group session, website, coaching call. Week 2, website and coaching session. That's for the men. The risk assessment was, I could spend days talking about it, but one of the key things we wanted to do was make sure that we weren't sort of misunderstanding risk. We were asked very clearly by women not to exclude men who we were cohabiting, because they were saying, we keep being told if we leave, then he'll get something, but actually he needs it now. Please don't not give him the intervention because we're still in cohabiting. So we thought, right, we'll have to understand the risk better. So we profiled the risk using a Canadian tool, actually. So a lot of the stuff that comes out, I think it's Simon Fraser University, the structured professional judgment. So we used, it was the Be Safe where we changed substance use in, but we used SARA and Justice. So we used those tools to get a clear profile so that at the very least we'd understand what change meant and how critical that change was to know what we would then have to do. That was really helpful. The structured case management, really helpful, getting people to talk to each other so people know what was happening. We were really clear about not giving information from the victim to the facilitators to pass on to the perpetrator to not create service-generated risk. But it was really helpful to have referrals as and when they were needed. And scheduling the coaching calls was important. We had a group agreement, so there was some sort of sensible sign up to how we were going to behave, how people were going to protect privacy, and how people would minimise the number of people who could be impacted by them receiving an intervention at home. So headphones on, etc., screens, children somewhere else. And in ideal situations, we'd get like a call to the partner while the man was doing the group. It didn't, I don't think, always translate to that, but that would be ideal. There was contingency management, so we provided data because we had a big thing about digital poverty. and digital literacy. So there was support to actually get people online. We sent out tablets. Headphones. We sent smartphones to partners so that they could have safe access with one SIM in it, so that he wasn't managing her phone. And, you know, we structured a lot of that together. And the men were to get to keep the tablets if they attended all the group, and they got extra data per month. So the longer they engaged, the more data they got. So that was quite helpful. The group sessions are very similar to a lot of the real core intimate partner abuse interventions. We go through the understanding of it, handling challenges, understanding difficulties in families, that ending, sexual jealousy, childhood, parenting, etc. And then promote different ways of handling it, because actually there's a lot of those men, harking back to the early childhood experiences, haven't learnt pro-social skills. They don't know them. They don't have a sense of how to do this. There's a lot of this sounds like it makes a great deal of sense. In the intimate partner abuse, domestic abuse world, some of this sounds like we're teaching men just skills, and that's going to fix all domestic abuse, or we're going to tell them not to drink. It's quite controversial. We're not saying that. It's not the causal factor, but these elements help. You can't get somebody to stop doing something and leave just a vacuum. There has to be something pro-social. So towards the end of the group, we're talking about actually how do you relate well? Who and what is your plan for going forward? How are you going to engage with the next steps and the next services? I mean, when we were doing the group in person, what we'd done incentivised instead was we had vouchers that linked into their personal goal plans. So if they wanted to be fitter, then there were gym vouchers. If they wanted to take their kids out more, there were vouchers for the cinema, you know, to really make it that they were really going to be able to achieve this pro-social life. We now have the advanced programme online. It's in 4 different languages, which is excellent.
4 plus English.
Oh, sorry, it's in 5 languages. It's in English and translated into 4 languages. So, and those are the languages of the men sort of are coming through sort of our justice and substance use services. So we've got like Polish, Urdu, Punjabi, and Romanian. Thank you. You get to choose which coach you would like, and we've got one voice for all the coaches. You turn up, so you go to a group, you would go then log on to this, you go through various different check-ins, check-outs, so there's a real structure, so we're getting people in, we're teaching them emotional literacy, we're showing them grounding, we're getting them to do breathing exercises and muscle relaxation at the start. We then deliver the actual intervention element, and then we sort of reverse that so that at all points there should be a focusing in and then a coming out and not feeling distressed at the end of it. We've got a range of tools, so things like time-out plans, coping, distress, relapse prevention plans that you can go back to and have a toolkit that you can look at. There's a lot of trying it out, so a lot of trying to get that CBT homework done, and how did you get on? Did you try it out? How did it work? You're asked by your online coach, you're asked by your physical coach. A lot of high-risk situations and those if-then statements, so to make them, you know, to understand that so that you can really highlight the relapse prevention. And we've got a film here that we would use in the intervention, and we stop like at points and say, what's going on? What do you see? How can you do it differently? How do you rate that? How could you apply it to yourself? So Mark has come back. He's been working. He's trying to get off drugs. His partner's there. That's not the situation with them. So the other bit was when he desists and she doesn't.
There's no volume for some reason.
There should be volume on this one.
She's my mate.
I can't believe people like that.
People like what? What, people like me?
Where do you get the money from? You get out.
Wait, what?
I do not want you in my house.
Our house is my house as well. Do you want me to go?
Yes. Yes, she does want you to go.
No, she doesn't want you to go. You stay where you are. If you don't like it, Mark, you know where the door is.
You do one.
Listen, mate. I'll call you later.
Why do you always have to ruin everything?
all our money on that. That was for Christmas.
When did you get so boring?
And when did you think it was a good idea to spend everything we had on that shit?
You got into it once as well, you know.
Yes, I did. But I've changed. And you could have too if you stuck to the programme. I've got a job. I'm trying to better myself.
You spend 2 days a week shoveling shit.
I'm not going to get angry, Kathy. I don't want to do that.
It's always about what you want, isn't it, Mark? You got me into crack in the first place. You wanted me to get help. You wanted me to sort my life out. What about what I want, Mark?
I don't know. You do you. I'm going to focus on me. I want to need some fresh air. And this is not good for you.
You think you're so much better than me, don't you, Mark? You think you're better than everyone. But you're a loser, Mark. You're a fucking loser. You're a waste of space. It's like your dad. I hate you, Mark. I really hate you. Fuck off. Leave me alone.
So if I can just highlight that was to show that, you know, even when provoked, when things were very difficult, there were ways of walking away and not being abusive. So in previous examples of that, he would have been really violent and abusive. You know, the spending the money, the various different elements of it. But we would stop, like, at various different points and get guys to sort of think what was happening, you know, and how they would do it differently and how it would have played out in their life. The purple is all about the women's services, so we proactively contact partners and ex-partners, explain how and why we've got the number, why we're getting in touch with them so that they have the information and they have the support so that it cannot be privileged against them. We've got the partner website and we offer comprehensive training. The training is now all online. So we take people and we train them through the theory, we train them through the risk assessment, we get them to do various different tasks. We've got all sorts of little learning quizzes and stuff like that. They then go through and get certification. They learn all, so both the facilitators and the partner support workers learn the whole programme. And then they deliver some material, it gets kind of signed off as competent, and then they have access to all the material to deliver the website, the coaching calls, the teams, etc. And there's PowerPoints, various different things, so all of it is in the manual, it's online, everything's there to allow them to deliver it easily. The assessment, delivery and coaching call is what they would have to do as a facilitator, so you'd do a risk assessment, suitability and eligibility, based on a structured professional judgment and show that you'd be able to understand who's suitable, who isn't, and what are the key risks that you're managing, and that the risk and safety management and planning is in place. The delivery, in the group session, they have to kind of mock up that they can do it. So we're just looking for empathy, group skills, and that they stick to the script, basically. Coaching call, you know, checking on the risk assessment stuff, the monitoring, that reinforcing a message, checking out any additional learning, and getting people to promote, to actually use the skills. And the coaching call, they do, the partner support workers do a first partner call and then a call saying, you know, this week your ex-partner will have done blah, 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 and you might see this, and this is what we would be doing. What support do you need? What information do you need? And now I'll pass to Gail, and she can talk you through the end bit, which is the evaluation of how it's going so far.
Thanks. And I promise it'll be over and we can do questions and lunch. So yeah, the evaluation. So let's start it off by describing when we had it, the programme was group work only. So I'll talk you very briefly through the trial of the group work intervention. So the advanced group programme, we had 104 men that were randomly allocated to receive either the advanced treatment or just their usual substance use treatment. But men in the advanced group also got their usual substance use treatment. And we did find at the end of the intervention, so we only followed men up to 16 weeks, but we did see reductions in the group of men who had attended the advanced program, the group program. We saw reductions in abusive behaviour. So that was definitely going in the right direction. We saw reductions in IPV perpetration, and we also saw a reduction in the scale we used to measure controlling behaviours. And men, we were, before we started, lots of people were saying to us, well, these men won't want to come to this intervention. But men did, because it was volunteers, they weren't court mandated to attend the intervention, and men were motivated to attend, and they did want to change their relationships and learn new skills to have better relationships. And you can see in this quote here, I've changed me and how I respond, how I react. And because I've done that, people have changed the way that they are or they act around me, which has been more positive and more supportive of what I do and more supportive of me. My girlfriend's definitely seen the change. She actually asked me last week, was it because of the stuff that I'm doing and the extra responsibility I'm taking? It's just the little things like breathing techniques. It's about taking your time to explain yourself correctly. So, as Liz said, we were in the middle of a large trial of the group programme. We were starting to recruit. We'd gone through ethics, and then COVID happened, and probably like many of you in the room, we thought, oh, great, we get to stay home for a couple of weeks, and then we'll resume recruitment or 2 months, and then obviously it was apparent that wasn't going to happen. So we adapted the intervention, as Liz has explained in great detail, and then we did a feasibility study. So it wasn't an RCT. We had 40 men in substance use treatment from 7 different services, so they were in some cases they were in groups with people who weren't in their own locality, and we managed to follow 25 of them up at 16 weeks. And we attempted to recruit their current or ex-partners, so we got 21 of the 40 partners, and we followed up 11 of them at the end of the programme. And we did a sort of process evaluation as well to really understand, how it was working in practice. And we assessed outcomes using the abusive behaviour inventory. So, one of the first things or first aims of any perpetrator programme is really to look at making men be accountable for their behaviour. So instead of saying, it's not me, it's the drink, to actually acknowledge, or she provoked me, she should be the one that's sitting in this intervention. Why is she not here? Why is it just me? So to actually have men starting to take accountability for their behaviour is a massive step and a really positive outcome. So one of the men said, I realise that you can be abusive in tons of different ways, and some of my behaviour was abusive. I'd be very defensive or aggressive in the way that I said stuff, and you don't need to do that, really. And, again, to stress, it was a small sample size, but we did have 48% of the advanced D sessions, so that's the online groups, the website sessions and the coaching calls completed. And that's pretty high for a perpetrator programme among this client group, of which there are only a couple of other studies being done. And we saw reductions, so this is men saying that on the scales, that they had reduced, 68% of the men followed up had reduced their abusive behaviour, and 40% had reduced their controlling behaviours. And if we assume that the men we weren't able to follow up had stayed the same or got worse, we're still looking at, high 40% of men had reduced their use of abusive behaviours. And when we look at attendance, you can see the group sessions were I was going to say in the green, but now I understand the man giving the presentation this morning, everything's changed colour. So the top weird colour of blue, cornflower blue, is the core sessions. So that was the group sessions that were attended. So they were better attended than the website sessions completed, than the coaching calls. So we're looking at new ways now that it's been rolled out in some substance use settings of, men can actually come into the substance use setting and do the groups. They can come in and do the website sessions and have their coaching calls or coaching sessions straight after to try and increase the use of those. But many men said they preferred the convenience of the digital delivery, saying it was much easier to do things at home or do things by phone. It wasn't as daunting, especially for those men with anxiety issues or who were working. But we also had others who said they would much rather have come into the service and done things face to face. They would have felt a bit more engaged. We also had because we were giving out tablets, we do actually have a story of a man who was homeless but still engaged with the substance use setting, and he was engaging in groups and things you know, from under a bridge at one point, which is, you know, an amazing testament to that individual. And men found the content really good, especially the videos. So we've showed you some of them today. They felt the videos really stuck in their heads, and it gave them, the intervention itself gave them the tools they needed to start to do things a bit differently and stop things getting worse. And a lot of men talked about how the website sessions reinforced what they were doing in the group. And that the coaching calls, which built on both of those as well, were really, really good. And especially one guy talks about when he was going through a really hard time, he found it a great support. It was real-time support with what was going on in my life, and he thought that was invaluable. So the coaching calls should be every week throughout the session, throughout the intervention, sorry. Although not a key target, so it's not a substance use intervention, it integrates content around substance use, and men were also receiving their usual substance use treatment. So during the feasibility study, we did see reductions from men in their reported alcohol and drug use days. But one guy says, you know, I'm still having moments where I'm using maybe 1 or 2 or 3 days a week, but apart from that, things have definitely moved on from where they were in that 16-month period. But he was still getting annoyed at himself because he was still using by the end of the programme. He didn't think it was going to work miracles, but I think I've made enough effort to reach some of my goals. I don't think I've made enough effort, sorry. And facilitators also, they thought the content was fantastic, really valuable, comprehensive, but they talked about it being unrealistic to deliver in the 1 hour time frame for the groups that we have. The 1 hour time frame is now 2 hours, so that's been addressed. We definitely work with services to take their comments on board. And they thought the integrity support, which is like programme management, really strengthened the consistency and delivery. And they valued the ability to link in at regular intervals with the women's support workers who provided information from the female partners that was quite different to what they were getting from the men. So having that safeguarding case management was really important. And some believed that delivering the group virtually made it more accessible, gave men more flexibility, but then others reported that men hadn't got to grips with the technology, or they preferred, you know, to be able to see people on screen. And several facilitators reported difficulties contacting men for the coaching calls, but again, that's probably not too dissimilar to what we see in substance use treatment settings anyway. And then we also got views from the women that we managed to recruit, and women talked about it being nice to have someone that they could talk to who didn't judge them when they could speak to the partner support workers, to be able to say, you know, that I do feel scared sometimes, but to know there's somebody that's checking up on me and asking if I do feel okay. It feels like I've got backup. And women themselves reported changes, not everyone, but some reported changes in their partners' or ex-partners' behaviour. So we'll sit down and discuss it so that we can work through it better. I do think his behaviour's changed, and I think it's because he realises that not everybody in this world is perfect. I think it's opened his eyes that everyone has their own different feelings and opinions. I'm not going to be like, it's his rules and his regulations. I'm not one of the children. I'm an adult, and we're equal partners. And again, a small sample size, but women, so we followed up 21 women, and the majority of them reported that his abusive behaviour towards her had reduced. And similarly, over half reported that his use of controlling behaviours had reduced. So again, if we assume that the women that weren't followed up were still receiving abuse, we're looking at, you know, a fair amount of women experiencing less abuse. And about 62% of them had received support while their partner was receiving the advanced D intervention. And so we've done these 2 studies in men in substance use treatment who are volunteered or voluntold, as Liz likes to call them. And we've now received funding for another 4 years to do a very large cluster randomised control trial with men who are court mandated, so men in probation, so men who are serving a community sentence for intimate partner violence, but who also have problems with alcohol and or drugs. So that's going to happen in 32 probation delivery units, 22 in England and 10 social work criminal justice areas in Scotland. And we're at the process of recruitment at the moment, so hopefully in a couple of years we can come back and tell you how that's gone. So the key messages, Advance D and Advance are targeted perpetrator programs for men with alcohol and drug problems who are usually excluded from existing perpetrator programs. Hopefully you'll be able to tell us that there's all these amazing referral pathways in Canada that we can learn from you. Attendance has been comparable with other integrated perpetrator interventions for men with substance use disorders, and the uptake of partner support also similar. We think we have demonstrated positive findings, so some reductions in abusive behaviour, but we obviously need longer term follow-up. And with the new trial, we'll be following men up and their partners for 12 months, and then we're using routine data, health, drug and alcohol, criminal justice, police data to look at longer term outcomes. So we've got permission for 24 months, and then hopefully we'll keep going. So I think we've shown that with the correct case and risk management in place, alongside integrated support for female current or ex-partners, that you can deliver both a group or a blended digital delivery version of the intervention. They can be delivered safely, and they can be delivered by drug and alcohol workers with the correct training. So that's everything. You've got our emails there. The Reduce IPV website is being updated, so hopefully by the start of December everything will be there. But the other link to the project has all the papers of everything that we've talked about for you to download, or just email us directly. And we've got 20 minutes for questions, which is what we said, so that's amazing. I'm very, very pleased. So I wonder if we could start with me asking you a question. I'm guessing most of you are working in Canada, mostly. Do you have something like this? Are there perpetrator programs for men who use substances? Are your domestic abuse policies mentioning substance use, and how is that been going? Do we have a roving mic? Or do you want to?
I spend a lot of time working with folks who are looking for connection to services, and I would say domestic violence services in general, but particularly support for the perpetrator is virtually non-existent.
So I missed the start of that, but I think I didn't hear where you worked other than Vancouver, but you did say that there's no perpetrator programs.
Yeah, so I work in Vancouver in the downtown east side, and any kind of domestic violence program, in order to access one, it has to be court ordered, and even when it's court ordered, oftentimes the onus is put on the individual to find a program. And even when it's court ordered, it's often very, very difficult. And then the person choosing not to access a program because there's no program available gets used as rationale for further sort of court involvement, because the person wasn't following the court orders, even though they were trying to. So it's this really awful, vicious cycle.
Okay, well, that's terrible to hear, but it's not surprising, unfortunately. So.
I don't know if you can hear me, but back in the day I delivered programs in probation, and we had a similar issue. And what we were told is we were to tell people to go around and hand themselves into the police so that they could be then arrested, convicted, and then mandated into a program. I don't think anyone ever took that advice.
Is there anyone else wants to talk about their experience of trying to access services? Or I'm also interested in, we did a bit of work, I will open it up to questions to us, I'm not trying to get out of it. We did a bit of work looking at the drug and alcohol strategy and the domestic or gender-based violence strategies to look at how they talked about each other, if indeed they did. And I did try to have a look at the alcohol and drug strategy from Canada last night, and I couldn't see any mention of domestic abuse in that or the other way around. So I don't know if I've missed something. If anyone wants to comment on.
I don't think you've missed anything.
Right.
I think our government and policy makers have missed it entirely.
Is there any here?
Hope so. No, I think generally speaking, we're quite under-resourced relative to the UK in pretty much everything related to social services and healthcare. Everything from we have a much lower average number of family doctors per population. Social workers are hard to find and don't seem to stick in a job longer than 18 months. It's I'm amazed at the resources that have gone into this program, that there's even someone willing to fund it as an option. And a lot of our
Twice they funded
a lot of our digital interventions seem to be third-party sort of private entities giving very generic, low-quality pseudo-CBT to people with small to middling problems, and the people with severe issues are not really being addressed. So I think you might be asking for something that doesn't seem to exist. I work in rural Manitoba, which is extremely under-resourced to begin with, but I can't even think where I'd send somebody to our referral centres to access something like this. It's just not a thing as far as I know.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Liz or I, or comments? Are we supposed to be doing the thing where people write on a bit of paper?
Hello. I'm curious, I think I heard you mention it near the beginning, that there's some safeguards in place. I know when I looked into the literature quite some time ago around some of these questions, that one of the concerns about psychological programs for perpetrators is that it can arm them with psychological vocabulary and concepts that they can then use to further psychologically abuse partners. And so I'm wondering what kind of guardrails your program has in and around that, and how much, I'm sure you've thought of this and sort of what you've done about that possibility.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, actually. I mean, one of the reasons, so I spent 15 years working on the Pro Board, so I'd release people or not if they convinced me they'd actually made behavioural changes, and I think that's the focus. So one of the reasons that we're focusing very much on the partner outcome or the ex-partner outcome and in the follow-up data on behavioural change is so that we're not looking at the talk. The last 3 or 4 elements are it's really difficult to talk the talk about how you implement something in your life. How's that going to help, and how are you going to use that if you haven't actually made some changes? And we can't guarantee that people don't learn that fabulous language. And I'm very keen not to say that we were psychopathologizing individuals and forgetting the overall picture, you know, because it is mostly male to female violence in our convicted populations and in those who report. But yeah, there's quite a lot of high-level cynicism. The tool from Canada we use also, though, looks at victim vulnerabilities and looks at how men can exploit victim vulnerabilities to continue to abuse. We're really clear about and careful about how men can use attending at the programme for child protection hearings and such like. We'll write a letter saying you've attended, and that's it. We're not making any promises about change, but the fact that we've got a comprehensive risk assessment that draws together a lot of the things, but including things like personality disorder, manipulation, honesty, deception, breach of, there's a lot of things in there. It really creates a good formulation of what's going on, and it's that pen portrait and understanding of the person, I think, that will hopefully prevent that being used or abused. But that is why we've got quality trainer and we're selecting good people to deliver. Because, I mean, again, there was a large meta-analysis of what makes good, effective interventions in justice settings, and it's focused delivery, but by people who are supported and trained and quality, etc. And you're like, oh, really? So if you spend money doing it well, then you get good outcomes.
And I think that, thinking about substance use workers, they are all trained in group work or delivering group work and have experience in group work. So that was part of their original trial, was not just looking at outcomes. It was about, was it feasible to, for substance use treatment workers to be trained to deliver this particular intervention. And, we've been lucky with the substance use workers that we've had, and quite a lot of the substance use settings are now working so that they would join up with the Women's Support Service. So they might have somebody from the domestic abuse sector and somebody from the substance use world being the 2 facilitators that deliver together. So they get the same training, but they're bringing different expertise to the table. So I think there was a question from... Yeah.
Actually, very interesting, thank you. I'm a family physician in Quebec. I'm a family physician. I work in addiction medicine and occupational medicine, and basically, I evaluate certain workers with mental health issues, and my experience is that when workers are off work for adaptive disorder or whatever, and it's in a context of where they were accused of harassment within the workplace. So I evaluate them, and we have this evaluation, and then I reach out and try to identify if they were a victim of harassment or the perpetrator of harassment, to see if there's any violence within the home. And so, it's interesting that certain people will eventually go and get help, either because they're a victim at home or a perpetrator. And so from the workplace, we identify victims or perpetrators, and we refer them for help. So it's a way of, giving out help, and certain employers will actually invest in the therapy. So if they have difficulty having access through the public system, they can have access to the private. Okay. So, yeah.
That sounds incredibly positive. There's a duty of care in the UK for all the organisations to have a domestic abuse policy, and I think that used to focus on referring victims. People are starting to recognise that they've actually got a duty to deal with the perpetrators as well, but they haven't fully addressed it.
Any other comments or questions? Or?
If I could, sorry, I talk too much sometimes.
I can't see you because the disco lights above your head.
I'm really curious about sort of the cultural aspect of this, that I think you're absolutely right to identify patriarchy as a problem, and I'd wonder if there's a difference between people who wish they weren't doing it but don't know what else to do, and the people who feel entitled to control or abuse their partners, that is part of their right, their obligation, their duty, and then what sort of strategies that you've had there, because this almost seems like a fundamental shift in a person's values, understanding of their role as a man, what a partnership is, and how on earth do you address that in a 10-week course in a way that's still respectful of a person and doesn't just make them throw up their hands and say, I'm not doing this. It seems like you've done something, but I'm really curious how you approach that.
Just to clarify, it's 16 weeks and then a booster, so it's... and it was not 10.
I think there's a range of things I want to say. I don't think really long interventions, and I'll put this in context, that in Scotland, the alternative intervention coming through the courts is 2 years. Okay. Now think about whether or not you could get substance-using men to A, agree to that as a condition of their sentence, and B, turn up for 2 years. Okay. So there's something about the quality of the intervention. The change is possibly not going to be the amount of time you think about it, but the motivation you have to make that change, I would say. But in terms of culture, absolutely. We address some of the cultures, and what we've done in terms of translation is there's been a sort of localized translation, so there's an interpretation of some of that, and we would be looking for people who were skilled within those cultures to help to use the material, but within a cultural context. I think if we were going to be adapting for different contexts, we'd be collaborating with people to create materials that make sense in different cultures. And yes, that patriarchal, if you think back to what I was talking about in terms of the rule-breaking pathway, that antisocial pathway, those are the ones who are high entitled, probably higher on personality disorder type things, and those are the ones where actually I'm not necessarily looking at behavioural change, a change in the cost-benefit. So enlightened self-interest is what might change them. Right, so we're not looking for enlightened new man, and we're not looking for massive change. We'll go back to just harm reduction almost, not being abusive, and maybe an inkling of a thought about changing that, the patriarchal tendencies. I don't think we can change everyone in 16 weeks, but make them think. And it is about the quality, I think, of the motivation to change rather than the length of time.
Sorry, this question is slightly sideways, but really just I know that you have some more information in your programs around disclosures of perpetration, for instance. I just wondered whether you had any thoughts around detection of that using screening. I'm from New Zealand, and it's one of our shames that we have some of the highest rates of IPV in the developed world, and all our screening is oriented around identification of victims of IPV. Do you have any thoughts around doing better at picking up men or others who are perpetrators?
So if we're thinking about substance use treatment, they do have intake forms and 3 months. So I think the thing about intake, all of our services in the UK ask about relationships, they ask about victimisation generally. So there's been a sort of shift to start asking about perpetration as well. But I think, and again, you'll see from that document if you pick one up, one of the key things is that relationship is not a static thing. So substance use services or wherever the intervention or wherever the health setting or social setting is, it needs to be a consistently followed up thing. It's not a static, you know, you're in a lovely relationship and single when you first join your drug and alcohol treatment. They should be checking what's happened if you've got a change in partner and all the changes in risk, pregnancy, separation. So all of that is in that document, and that's all what we try to do more sort of generically, not even around the intervention. I don't know if that answers your question or...
There's a couple of things that are sort of broader social policy changes and the legal changes. So in the UK, we've got routine inquiry in health settings. So that sense of like everyone has to ask the question. Now we're trying to improve how they ask the question rather than saying, oh, well, this won't apply to you, so probably it's a no. You know, but asking all women coming into services, particularly sort of GP and like coming through sort of pregnancy care and A&E, you know, so that routine inquiry is there to try and increase the reach. In Scotland, we've got off-site reporting, so the police are going to places that women are, rather than expecting women to come to police stations, and that's quite an interesting one. So they're trying to make it easy in schools and healthcare settings that you can report domestic abuse there. And then the other things, and I think this is something that Canada's thinking about, is across the UK we have coercive control, which is, you know, we have created an offence of coercive control. So that sense of where it's not physical violence, but it is controlling, abusive, manipulative behaviours, it is now against the law in Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales. And it has been used extensively as law, not just as an adjunct to physical violence, but as offences in and of themselves. So I think that range of different things. So guidance in substance use, guidance in health settings, changes in legislation, and physical, practical ways of allowing the reports is really important. And like talking about the cultural elements, I've been involved in other studies where we've got women coming from South Asian countries, so who are now being given like small animations about, you know, actually the Police Scotland will come and help you, even if you don't have recourse to public funds and you're on a spousal visa, they'll come and help you. Or like this particular other bit is that there's another animation about honour-based abuse, and this is not okay. So that control, coercive nature is also being publicised. So there's a range of different strategies. It's maybe not just one. It's maybe lunchtime.
I think it's probably lunchtime. I can see people coming in. So thank you all so much. And we've left some information there, but you can download, if they've all gone now, you can download everything from the website. Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.